please, can you take your seats so we can start? If everybody is seated, we can start. Good afternoon. So I hope you had a good lunch and had some time to go to some side events as well, or be outside a little bit. Agenda item 3B. I had Brazil, Canada, and the US on my list. So I would like to ask Brazil to take the floor on this agenda item on feedstock uses. Brazil.
Thank you very much, Mr. Co-Chair. Since this is the first time this delegation takes the floor, we would like to congratulate you on your leadership at this session, and thanks to the government and the people from Canada for their warm welcome, and also the Secretariat for preparing this meeting. We take note of the concerns expressed by many delegations and of the report on feedstock. We believe the engagement in this discussion is proof that this is a matter that requires careful consideration by parties. We look forward to further exploring this issue on a contact group, bearing in mind that currently feedstock uses are not controlled by the Montreal Protocol and that we should not prejudge ongoing negotiations in other fora. A contact group will also be an appropriate setting for having our questions answered. If some delegations believe that another decision on this issue is to be moved forward, all questions must be addressed as soon as possible. Brazil is looking forward to continuing considering this matter with interested delegations. Thank you.
Thank you. Then I would like to give Canada the floor, and then the last speaker, the US.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. Like other delegations, Canada believes that the issue of feedstock uses of controlled substances is one that deserves careful consideration by the parties, given the substantial increase in ozone-depleting substance production for such uses over the past 20 years, and that it appears that such production and use contribute to a significant source of unexplained emissions. Previously, parties did not identify this issue as a priority, partly because they had assumed an emission factor from the tip of 0.5% of emissions of controlled substances from feedstock uses. However, as we've heard in recent years, the TEEP has revised its emission factor, notably by also considering losses from the production and distribution of the controlled substances concerned, resulting in an increasing the total emission factor to a range of 1.5 to 6.1%, with a most likely factor of 3.6%. When you consider this emission factors against the level of total ODS emissions, total ODS uses feedstock, then this is starting to look like very significant emissions indeed. And just to say that, like other delegations who are spoken, we're not talking about feedstock uses being controlled under the Montreal Protocol. We're just trying to understand the scope of the problem and potential actions that could be taken to address them. Now, we noted that the TEEP's conclusion that currently there are relatively few technically and commercially available alternatives or alternative processes to the use of controlled substances for their feedstock uses. Therefore, encouraging parties to replace such substances by alternatives, may have limited effect. However, as summarized in the 2024 TEEP Progress Report, there are best practices and technologies that can be applied to significantly minimize emissions from controlled uses used as feedstock. We would support some action, some decision by the parties, encouraging parties that have production and use of these substances as feedstock to put in place or strengthen best practices to minimize emissions, taking into account the practices outlined in the TEEPS report. Another possible element of a decision that we would like to explore is whether, under the multilateral fund, we can consider one or two projects within the production sector in order to support best practices and technologies to minimize emissions of controlled substances used as feedstock. While feedstock is not controlled use, in the context of undertaking production projects to phase out or phase down substances, we may want to think, whether we could just supplement some of these projects by adding activities related to supporting best practices and technologies. So this is something that we would like to suggest as a possible request of the parties to the Executive Committee of the Multilateral Fund. We heard that Australia has an interest in drafting a decision on this issue, so we just wanted to outline a couple of our ideas, and we'll work with Australia and other parties to develop a draft decision on this issue. Just to note that the next agenda item on this is on carbon tetrachloride. CTC is produced and used as a feedstock. For us, at the end of the day, we think that the issue of CTC can certainly be combined into a decision on feedstock. So that's something that we wanted just to flag, that as we move forward with the agenda, perhaps these two issues could be considered in tandem, given that they're very much related. And we would also support a contact group to be eventually established on this issue. Thank you.
Thank you. And then the USA.
Thanks very much, Mr. Co-Chair. We were listening carefully to the discussion before the lunch break and the interventions just now, and maybe we have a few additional reflections to share. As we think about how we have treated feedstock, we want to just reflect on the fact that feedstock, the amount that is entirely used as a feedstock is subtracted from production, and that's how it's been treated by under the protocol. And we do report on production for feedstock uses. So that is something that we want to make sure that we're clear on, that it's not that it's entirely outside the scope of this body. It is under the scope of this body, but with a recognition that amounts that are entirely used as a feedstock are subtracted from the amount that we consider production, and we do report on that. Earlier, we had asked a question of the TEEP about the changes in the emission factors. And we've heard some indication about whether or not the amounts have gone up or have gone up in terms of the amount being used for feedstock. But we do want to maybe think a little bit more about the TEEP's response to that and how that plays with the emission factors changes. So as we understood, Australia is drafting a decision. That may be a point that we want to come back to in what they put together, or perhaps in whatever format you have us discuss that draft decision after it's introduced to the body. That may be something we want to talk about more, either then or ahead of that with the Australian delegation on the margins of plenary. We also wanted to note one concern that we have that we heard a little bit of reference to, which is ensuring that any amount that is produced for the intention of its use as a feedstock is then actually used as a feedstock and is not somehow diverted into consumptive uses. If that is happening, that would of course be a concern to this body and to our delegation, and something that we would want to take up. We haven't heard anything that indicates that is definitively happening, but just a concern that it could be happening. So that's something else that we may want to reflect on. again, in whatever format you determine we should have this further discussion in. We're also thinking about some of the comments and questions that came up earlier in terms of whether or not there are alternatives to ODS that are used as feedstocks or other controlled substances used as feedstocks. And we'll just note that while we hope that there is movement in that direction, we also understand that the basis for why we excluded from the definition of production amounts entirely used as feedstock in the production of other chemicals was in reference to that continued need, and that they are converted in that process, and thus that process, emissions from that process should be something that if they are more emissive than this body thought, that may be a place where we also want to have a conversation about best practices. So those are just a couple additional thoughts that we have. Many of the other thoughts we had, we heard reflected before the lunch hour, and we know you are striving to stay on time, so we'll take that up again in a later discussion. Thank you.
Thank you by being brief, and that was the end of the list. I'll just take a moment to consult. Thank you. As we heard, Australia is working indeed on a CRP, and as soon as the CRP is ready to be introduced, we will provide you with a way forward. And I would like now to go to the next agenda item, CTC 3C. So we heard the introduction also by Teep, and now it's time to get to the general statements and discussions on CTC. Who would like to start? I see India on my list. Please, India.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. Mr. Co-Chair, the MC talks, like in the case of feedstock uses, has given the recent trends in the production and use of CTC as feedstock. Our views are similar to the previous intervention made for use of ODSs as feedstock uses. Having said this, we would like to understand from the MC talk regarding the fugitive leaks and losses of CTC used as feedstock, if any. Secondly, we would like to have more understanding from MC talk on the feasible and viable alternatives that can be used to reduce feedstock production of CTC other than already indicated in the previous reports. Thirdly, considering the information provided in section 5.4.2 relating to recent scientific studies relating to chloromethanes and CTC, we would like to understand more regarding the methodology for estimates of annual global emissions of CTC. Lastly, with regard to non-fluorinated low GWP products, we would like to have more information on such products and their penetration, especially in Article 5 countries. Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair.
Thank you by providing some clear let's say, ways forward, what you would like to know more in future. Thank you. Are there other delegations asking for the floor? I see Switzerland. Switzerland, please, you have the floor. And I would like to ask others who would like to speak, please indicate that you would like to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. As we have just heard from the discussion on the last agenda item, there is a concern in general on increasing emissions from feedstock use, and this is specifically true for CTC. Its use has been increasing to nearly 400,000 metric tons in 2022, and which in ODP tons is by far the most relevant feedstock being used. We have further information from Teep that shows that there's quite a range in emission factors depending on the operation in the production facility, and if it's a modern one or a bit older one. So this means to us that there is some potential there to implement further reductions of the emissions. That's why we would like to discuss this important matter further and explore options how parties could be assisted in minimizing emissions from feedstock production and use, such as they were already urged to do back in 1992. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Switzerland, and also by being very brief and concise. Norway.
Thank you, Co-Chair. And we have similar concerns as expressed on the previous items. We see similar challenges, and we would be willing to continue discussing this issue, but perhaps if there would be a possibility to merge the discussion with the previous item, that maybe is our work in an effective way. Thank you.
Thank you, and I heard several times the same request. So I have Hungary now on my list, and I please would like to ask others who would like to speak, please indicate it, because let's say, if there are not any more interventions, I quickly would close the list. So it's now Hungary, and I see Australia, but let's say in the second round, when I come back after Hungary, I would like to close the list. So Hungary, please.
Speaking for the EU, Mr. Co-Chair. So I think we can be brief here. We agree with what's been said. Of course, we would like to thank the TEEP again, also for helping to clear up some of the differences between top-down and bottom-up, and the good work there going on. Many of the things apply here that also were pointed out of the feedstocks issues and some possibilities to avoid, such as best practices, training, monitoring, etc. However, CTC is very important also as it's linked to the growing need for, or the growing production of HFOs. And one way is actually to avoid some of the CTC feedstock production is by looking also at other alternatives that can be used. Well, in light of the findings from the TEEP report, we would think that a good way forward is to discuss this in a contact group together with the feedstock issue. Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair.
Thank you, EU. Then I have Australia on the list, and I didn't see others, so then I close the list after Australia. So Australia, please.
Thank you, Co-Chair, and good afternoon to everyone. We would just like to thank very much the MC Talk for its report and its presentation. I think one of the key things I took away from the presentation was that the work that has been done both by the SAP and the MC Talk in looking at the discrepancy, the CTC bottom-up, top-down discrepancy that we've been looking at for probably more than 10 years. I think that with some good work and some thoughtfulness in approach, that actually that discrepancy is now within the margins of error, I think, of both the top-down and bottom-up estimations. And so I think that we are sort of reasonably comfortable now that that discrepancy issue is no longer something that we need to take too much account of unless it widens again. We note that CTC is primarily used as a feedstock, and so therefore we would agree with the proposal to merge those discussions. Thank you.
Thank you, Australia. And then I would like to have a minute just to consult. So, thank you. My proposal is that indeed what was put forward by several delegations already, that CTC is very directly related to feedstocks. So in that case it could be taken up also under 3B. And because it's very often used as a feedstock, so and all the elements are provided by TEEP, what is the new information, and that can be used. And that when we come back, let's say on 2B, let's say that on the CRP, I assume that we can merge the two items, but the idea is now to close then agenda item 3C, under the understanding that CTC also will come back under 3B. Is that acceptable? Yeah, I don't see any reactions, so I think it's acceptable by everybody, so then that's the way forward. So we come back to 2B at a later stage. Then I would like to go to agenda item 4, life cycle refrigerant management. There the TEEP also provided us with a very good report. It's based on decision 35/11, and the summary of the report can be found in the document 46/2 addendum 1. I would like to ask the members of the task force to come on the podium and to present the key findings of the report. And I already would like to thank everybody of the TEEP and ex-task force for the hard work and dedication to get to this result. So please take your seats, and you can have the floor as soon as you're ready.
Sorry? It's okay. It's okay now? Yeah, it is. Okay. Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Roberto Peixoto. It's my pleasure, on behalf of Decision 35/11 TEEP Task Force, to present, together with Hild, the Task Force report. The report addresses the 4 main points requested by the parties, which are available technologies for the leakage prevention, recovery, recycling, reclamation, and destruction of refrigerants, and their accessibility in Article 5 parties. The obstacles and challenges associated with the effective leakage prevention, recovery, recycling, reclamation, and destruction of refrigerants. The third was the costs and climate and ozone benefits associated with life cycle refrigerant management. And finally, policies, incentive schemes, good practice, and the lessons learned. Next one, please. TEEP established a task force consisting of 22 members, 9 from Article 5 countries and 13 from non-Article 5 countries. The task force members are primarily from the Technical Options Committee, especially the Refrigeration, Air Conditioning, Heat Pump Technical Options Committee, the RTOC, and also external experts. What is life cycle refrigerant management. Life cycle refrigerant management, that will be called LRM, is a comprehensive approach to manage refrigerants in refrigeration, air conditioning, and heat pump sector. From the initial design of the equipment, the installation and use phase, to the reuse or destruction of the refrigerant. The report developed by the task force does not cover the production stage of the refrigerant. Life cycle refrigerant management, or LRM, aims basically to minimize direct emissions of refrigerant, maintain equipment performance, and increase refrigerant supply through 4 basic steps. First one, prevention of refrigerant leakage. Second, recovery of refrigerant during service and at the end of life. Reuse, either through recycling or reclamation, and finally, destruction. Now I will hand over to Hild, who will explain these 4 types of measures in more details. Please. Okay.
Good afternoon. I will first explain leak prevention. Leak prevention refers to a variety of measures aiming to avoid refrigerant loss during the RAC HP life cycle. Leak prevention results in climate, ozone, and other environmental health and safety benefits, and provides energy savings by maintaining RAC HP performance. Leak prevention requires a variety of preventive actions during the design, manufacturing, transport, storage, installation, use, and end-of-life treatment. International standards and other guidance provide recommendations in this regard. Examples are the selection of suitable materials, components, joints, packaging, training, and tightness inspections to verify that the refrigerant is not leaking. Tightness inspection requires the use of leak detection methods, which can be direct or indirect methods or a combination thereof. Examples of direct methods are sensors, soap suds, UV dyes, and acoustic cameras. Indirect methods analyze RAC HP performance parameters, such as pressure, temperatures, capacity, and energy consumption. Tightness inspection can be achieved through comprehensive training, accessibility to leakage detection equipment, supported by policies that promote regular RAC HP inspection and repair. Leak detection technologies are available, but not always accessible in Article 5 parties. Examples of supporting policies are provided in Chapter 5 of the report. Moving on to refrigerant recovery. This refers to the recovery of refrigerants from RAC HP and from refrigerant cylinders during servicing or prior to disposal. Off-the-shelf and custom-made recovery technologies are available, but not always accessible in Article 5 parties. Refrigerant recovery is essential before recycling, reclamation, or destruction can take place, but remains low in many Article 5 and non-Article 5 parties. Effective refrigerant recovery requires a change in behavior to stop venting to the atmosphere through comprehensive and continued technician training, access to refrigerant recovery machines, establishment of a logistic reverse supply chain with sufficient access to refrigerant recovery cylinders and tanks, sufficient technician time for complete recovery, and financial mechanisms to support responsible recovery. Recovered refrigerant can be reused by either recycling or reclamation. To determine whether a recovered refrigerant can be reused and where, it may be necessary to conduct a chemical analysis to know its composition. In some cases, the reuse may occur immediately without prior treatment. Reused refrigerant does not count towards Montreal Protocol consumption targets and can contribute to compliance. Both recycling and reclamation support the circular economy by reducing the need to produce new refrigerants. Incentive reuse are highly sensitive to the size and accessibility of the bank of refrigerant in RAC HP systems, regulatory environment, availability of alternative technologies, and to virgin refrigerant prices. If a phase-out or phase-down regime creates a shortage of refrigerant and leads to price increases, then refrigerant recovery and reuse may increase. However, if supply of newly produced refrigerant remains plentiful, then reused refrigerant may be non-competitive, and other policy and economic measures may be required to incentivize LRM. Refrigerant recycling involves a basic cleaning process, such as filtering and drying. It often occurs on-site and is most suitable for single-component refrigerants. Refrigerant reclamation is the reprocessing and upgrading of a refrigerant in order to restore the substance to a specified standard. This can be done through mechanisms such as filtering, drying, distillation, and chemical treatment. It often involves off-site processing at a central facility. The reclamation of blends presents particular challenges, as in some cases, composition changes can occur. Reclaimed refrigerants may need to be mixed with new refrigerants or reclaimed single-component refrigerants to meet the required specification. The final set of measures for LRM is refrigerant destruction. Some recovered refrigerants need to be destroyed, for example, if they're highly contaminated or there is no further market need. The Montreal Protocol has established a list of approved destruction methodologies for the purpose of production data reporting. There is adequate global capacity for destruction, but it is unevenly distributed between non-Article 5 and Article 5 parties and between Article 5 parties. It can be anticipated that destruction technology may improve in cost, scalability, mobility, and efficiency. And with that introduction to LRM measures, I hand back to my co-chair, Roberto.
The Commission asked TIP Task Force to elaborate on LRM costs. LRM requires substantial investment for the acquisition and operation of recovery, recycling, reclamation, and destruction equipment in both Article 5 and also non-Article 5 parts. LRM requires costs depend on the type of refrigerant, the scale of the operation, regional regulations, technology used, and the fate of the recovered refrigerant, reused or destroyed. Considering recovery and recycling, we can say it is relatively simple and dispersed. They are not capital intensive, but it requires large amount of recovery and recycling machines to be sustainable. On the other hand, equipment for reclamation is more sophisticated, capital intensive, and also centralized. LRM costs can be divided in capital costs and variable costs, for example, labor, and opportunity costs, like a revenue from leak controls and refrigerant recovery, compared to installing new equipment. Variable costs are determined by volumes or amount of refrigerant being recovered at the end or reused. Next one. This slide presents some common values for recover and recycle equipment and tools. Handheld leak detectors may cost around $400. Cylinders are below $100 for the small ones. Recovery machine can cost between $300 and $1,000 for a small capacity, but can cost around $3,000 for high capacity. Recover and recycle machine costs start at $1,200 depending on capacity. Next one, please. Common values for refrigerant identifiers and reclamation equipment are: refrigerant identifiers can be between $1,000 and $5,000. Gas chromatography costs around $45,000, and reclamation unit $5,000 onward, depending on capacity. Considering destruction of refrigerants, the cost of retrofitting existing rotary cement kilns would be between $50,000 and $100,000. New small rotary kiln, cement rotary kiln, is estimated to be around $3 million, and other technology, commercial plasma arc facility would be around $4.2 million. The task force also elaborated on the LRM policy framework. Some important aspects in these topics are: mandatory and voluntary LRM policies and programs are currently implemented in many parts, and lessons have been learned from the varying success of those policies and programs, such as LRM policy enforcement is challenged due to the large volume of end users, distributors, and independent contractors that are involved. Effective LRM requires stakeholder support, particularly when developing reverse supply chain infrastructure and technician training. Voluntary actions, comply offset generation, incentives, and corporate citizenship programs are also important. And the safe handling and transportation of refrigerants must also be considered due to the flammability of many new refrigerants. The task force identified that the LRM infrastructure in Article 5 parts, particularly in low-volume consuming countries, is inadequate. This includes a lack of many equipment and tools like leak detection, recovery and recycling equipment, and also associated tools, access to reclamation and destruction units and facilities, analysis laboratories, and expertise and logistics to effectively manage reused refrigerants. While some large industrialized Article 5 parts may have a more developed infrastructure, they often require upgrades or replacements for the existing tools and equipment in order to improve LRM. Significant benefits could arise from Article 5 parties working together in regional groups to set up capital-intensive integrated reclaiming and destruction infrastructure. Effective LRM requires capacity building, which involves training technicians to stop venting refrigerants and handle, as mentioned before, safety issues, as well developing local infrastructure for equipment, tools, and facilities. Considering ozone and climate benefits as requested by the decision, through a preliminary modeling effort, the task force assessed the ozone and climate benefits of LRM. The exercise considering two pre-Kigali scenarios, one without LRM practice and other with LRM practice in all parties. The simulation, the preliminary simulation, shows the impact of LRM, and the figures from the report, some figures are estimated ADCFC emissions reductions up to 5 kilotons ODP between 2025 and 2040, and estimated HFC and ADCFC emission reductions up to 39 gigatons CO2 equivalent between the same period, 2025 and 2050. Now I will hand over again to Hild to close this presentation with some of the main conclusions of our report. Thank you.
Okay. So to wrap up, these are the main conclusions of the task force report. Technologies are available for the leakage prevention, recovery, recycling, reclamation, and destruction of refrigerants, but not accessible in all Article 5 parties. There are policy, economic, and accessibility obstacles and challenges associated with effective LRM. If a phase-out, phase-down regime creates a shortage of refrigerant and leads to price increases, then refrigerant recovery and reuse may increase as well. However, if supply of newly produced refrigerant remains plentiful, other policy and economic measures may be required. Mandatory and voluntary LRM policies and programs are currently implemented in many parties, with varying levels of effectiveness. Establishing a data collection system by parties could inform their decision-making for optimal LRM strategies. The cost-effectiveness of LRM could not be assessed because of limited time and lack of data. Finally, the opportunity of LRM can be summarized as follows. LRM practices can be a key component of refrigerant emissions reductions. LRM can achieve emission reductions beyond those from strictly Kigali compliance. LRM may be the key tool for some parties to achieve Montreal Protocol compliance. So the TEEP continues to follow these issues and its potential emission reductions opportunities. And with that, on behalf of the TEEP LRM Task Force, Roberto and I thank you for your attention and welcome your questions and answers.
Thank you, TEEP Task Force, for the presentation and providing us with the latest information on LRM. You may go back to your seats in the room, and we will have a combined question and answer session, statements and discussion. So be aware that there could still be questions coming to you, but that can be done from the room itself. Before I open the floor for interventions, I would like to remind parties that, as requested in para 4 of decision 35/11, the Secretary is organizing a workshop back-to-back with MOB 36 to share information and discuss challenges and opportunities in life cycle refrigerant management. During the preparatory segment of MOP 36, parties will have a chance to consider the outcomes of the workshop. Should parties have suggestions on the workshop or wish or would like to share experiences, suggest speakers and also share relevant case studies, then please come to the Secretariat. Liazat Wabiosi is the one who is in charge. So now I would like to open the floor for interventions. And I see already 2 speakers on my list. The first one is Bahrain, Benin, Japan, and the list is getting longer. So first, Bahrain.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. I will interfere in Arabic, so I want to be sure the task force will be ready to have my intervention in Arabic.
The task force is seated now, and they have their earphones in, so you can start putting your intervention forward.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to especially thank the TIAB LRM Task Force for presenting this report, which is highly important and interesting. It includes a number of inspiring ideas. We found it detailed and very interesting. We in Bahrain have several experiences with regard to LRM, and I'm talking, of course, about Bahrain. For over 8 years, we have been working in the field of reclamation as well as training, so that we can give a new life to refrigerants. I saw that there were a number of challenges that have been mentioned. However, we did not hear about specific challenges faced by high ambient countries. In our countries, we face challenging when implementing these measures, especially that we have KIPS projects, and we foresee a greater number of challenges when it comes to LRM, the life cycle refrigerant management. We know that with regard to blended substances, we have to adopt methodologies that are completely different. I wish there were more detail about specific challenges. We would have welcomed the opportunity to talk with the TIAB LRM task force so that we could explain our challenges in countries with high ambient temperatures. On the other hand, I would like to talk about reclamation of refrigerants. We have certain equipment to reclaim the 410, for instance, R410, but these equipment are not capable to reclaim R410. in certain cases, we need an upgrade to those equipments, or we could need a different equipment to do so. So we wish we could have more details on these particular problems. We are now at a stage where we would welcome such suggestions. Also, I would like to talk about costs. This was a very interesting point in the report. My question is the following. The costs mentioned for certain equipments, are they the same for all countries? And I talk here about A5 and A non-5 countries. Certain equipments, for example, could, let's say, a leak detector could not be suitable for high ambient countries. And I'm only talking about these leak detectors. They could work in certain countries, but not in others. So I think that prices and costs could vary between countries. I would like to add something else. We heard about the LGC. We heard that it costs $45,000. According to my experience in the past year, the minimum price for GC equipment was $85,000 as a minimum. It was between $85,000 and $130,000. Therefore, I did not understand the cost that was presented to us. What did you base yourself on in order to present such prices? We need clarifications with regard to prices and to differences between the prices you presented us and the market price. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And I also heard some questions for the task force, especially on the costs. So I will take a couple of interventions and then I come to the task force for answers. Then the next one on my list is Benin, and then Japan, and then India. First, Benin.
Okay. Merci. Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. Since it's the first time that Benin is taking the floor, we would like to thank the Ozone Secretariat and the Government of Canada for hosting this 46 meeting of the Open-Ended Working Group. Our thanks also go to all the members of the TEEP for this new report on life cycle management of refrigerants. I must say this is an important issue for us as a developing country that does not manufacture such refrigerants. Gathering from the report, we identify 4 take-home lessons. The first is leak prevention and the 3 Rs: recovery, recycling, and reuse. It is quite clear that we have to have the necessary tools, and the report says as much. There needs to be more capacity building for our technicians, and here we invite Secretariat to look at the various projects that we're submitting so that there can be a proper coverage of these matters. Regarding reuse, earlier, we were told to identify the composition before reusing it, and recovered refrigerants can be reused directly. But that's a question we have. If we don't know what the refrigerant is that's been recovered, it might be hard to recycle and reuse it. There would have to be some kind of analysis to identify impurities before it is reintroduced into the circuit. Among the 4 points that we identified is destruction. The destruction methodology has been approved and research is ongoing. We note, following the discussion of this option in the last Conference of the Parties, we're told that this is an option, but what kind of scientific analysis has to be carried out to convince the promoters and donors? What proves that end-of-life cycle refrigerants are not going to cause damage to groundwater systems? And finally, we think that available technologies should be assessed in the countries with a view to making them more robust, because we have technologies, even though they might be small scale. We need to take stock and try to improve those technologies. And one last point. We welcome the workshops that have been announced for the next COP in Bangkok, but we would like to suggest that we go beyond that. We really need to assess all of the different dimensions of this problem. Thank you very much.
Thank you also by sharing your experiences and ideas on LRM. Then I have Japan and then India on my list. So Japan first.
Okay. Thank you, Co-Chair. As this delegation is taking the floor for the first time, I would like to first start off by thanking the Ozone Secretariat for the organization of this meeting, as well as the Government of Canada for hosting us here in Montreal. And we would also like to thank the TEEP LRM Task Force for the well-prepared report and very informative presentation. Japan, we see LRM as a very important key approach in addressing and further promoting effective control of refrigerant emissions worldwide, but so far it has not yet been adequately addressed. So we truly appreciate this well-compiled TEEP Task Force report on this topic, providing a comprehensive overview of the current situation and challenges, as well as the available technologies and strategies for effective LRM. We particularly highlight the importance of the leakage prevention and design considerations, taking into account its possible direct economic incentives for the end users, such as energy savings. In this TEEP report is also included Japan's LRM policies and related efforts, and we hope that our experience in this area can provide a useful guidance for other parties and can be utilized for enhancement of LRM efforts worldwide. We are also looking forward to the one-day workshop on LRM at the upcoming MOP this year, in which Japan would also like to actively contribute. And under our own initiative on fluorocarbons life cycle management, we call IFL, Japan has been promoting LRM capacity building and institutional strengthening activities in 5 countries, especially in Asia, while also promoting awareness raising through workshops and seminars across the world. Actually, at this OEWG meeting, we are also having a related side event to share Japan's effort and experience. So those who are interested are all invited to join the side event on Wednesday, scheduled from 6 p.m. Thank you.
Thank you, Japan. And I have quite a long list, so I ask everybody to be brief and focused on with the intervention. So, India.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. We would like to thank the task force of TEEP for the exhaustive report on life cycle refrigerant management and the presentation. Mr. Co-Chair, we would like to seek the following clarification on the report. First is regarding the technologies for refrigeration leak detection. Both direct and indirect methods have been explained. Technologies for leak prevention have also been explained in details in section 2.3 of the report. Can the task force throw some light on the mapping of the leak detection methods and leak prevention technologies in various countries, particularly Article 5 countries, including their adoption? Second is regarding refrigerant recovery, recycling, reclamation, and destruction. While these aspects are covered as a part of service technicians training, we would like to understand the challenges in terms of availability and accessibility of the required infrastructure, including that related to testing of quality and purity of refrigerants in the Article 5 countries. Third is while Chapter 5 of the report provides a detailed overview of policies and programs related to LRM, can the task force provide more understanding on the gaps to be addressed for enforcing the policies and measures for overcoming the gaps, in addition to the capacity building activities and ongoing training activities being carried out in the different countries? In terms of cost presented by the task force, it becomes quite challenging for the countries for implementing the recovery, recycling, reclamation, and destruction process. Establishing data collection systems have been proposed for tracking HFC's uses by country, sector, and substances for informed decision making for HFC phase-down initiatives and optimal LRM strategies. Additional data collection beyond that need under the Article 7 and CPPR is quite challenging for countries. Can the task force throw some light on the additional efforts as well as the resources needed in this regard? Lastly, in Chapter 8, the ozone and climate benefit likely to be achieved in implementing the proposed LRM practices have been explained. Regarding the greenhouse gas air pollution interaction and synergies gains model framework, we would like to have more understanding of the exemptions for the modeling exercise as well as the applicability in terms of different countries and regions. We'd also like to understand the implication of the model with respect to the policy framework in different countries and regions. Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair.
Very good, India, and I heard a lot of questions who you would like to be answered by the task force. I will go to the next speaker and task force, then I come back to you, and I hope you have all the answers on the questions that were raised. So, but first I go to Grenada.
Thank you very much, Mr. Co-Chair, and my compliments is extended to both co-chairs on your appointment as co-chairs for this very important meeting. Of course, too, I want to extend my courtesies to the Secretariat for the excellent arrangements so far of this meeting. Mr. Co-Chair, I would like to have my input into this conversation, but before I do that, I would want to express my eternal gratefulness to the task force for the presentation, for the development and presentation of this very detailed report on this very important issue. And this has been an issue that has been contemplated in several meetings at several levels under the Montreal Protocol, and it's an area that we have not yet found resolution for. I want to start from the back of the presentation and then make my way through the different chapters of the presentation. So I recognize that the task force has identified some opportunities in the summary, and these opportunities are key for the work that we have to do as ozone units in the context of the phase down of HFCs. We recognize that the growth of HFCs is happening at a very exponential rate in our markets, and we need to find every opportunity, as creative as they may be, to see how we can curtail the growth of HFCs. And this life cycle refrigerant management is one such opportunity, as has been identified by the task force in the summary. But with that comes a myriad of challenges, and these challenges have been identified. As a matter of fact, there has been a separate chapter that really dived deeply into the challenges. And part of the challenge that we have as low-volume consuming country has to do, first of all, with scale, because we're talking here about minuscule quantities that we have to account for and to manage. And then when we reflect on that with respect to the cost of equipment, it poses an even greater challenge for LVCs. So we look at the issue of technologies, as indicated in Chapter 3 of the report, and obviously within the LVCs, there are absolutely none of these available, not even in close proximity, that we can consider at this point in time. So it makes it extremely difficult for us to address issues of disposal and destruction. The report focuses heavily on accessibility to technologies and to equipment, and that is another critical area. So the equipment that has been identified and the cost, some indicative costs has been presented, and that makes it even more difficult and to some extent embarrassing for some of the LVCs who only have $145,000 to do stage one of the KIPs. We look at one piece of equipment, it was reported $45,000. We heard a counteracting, some research that was done in excess of $70,000 to $80,000 that piece of equipment is costing. If we were to consider seriously establishing reclamation centers, it means that our stage one KIP funding is even inadequate to do so. And so that is another challenge. So the financial mechanism for LRM is something that we are absolutely concerned about as LVCs because of the relative cost that is associated in managing these refrigerants. With regards to the economic assessment, we do hear from the task force that sufficient time was not available to complete an economic assessment. We are still hoping that something can be done in this regard, Mr. Co-Chair, because for us, an economic assessment, particularly for LVCs, is crucial and critical for us to even contemplate a lot of the measures that have been put forward in this report. So we're hoping that some time or some mechanism can be put in place to allow the task force to complete an economic assessment for life cycle refrigerant management. Right, and I mentioned the point about scale, Mr. Co-Chair. Chapter 6 clearly deals with that in terms of mentioning of the historical volumes of recovered refrigerants may have been too low to justify sustained investment in reclamation and destruction. And that is the issue that we are faced with as low-volume consuming countries who would like to make our contribution towards the whole issue of life cycle refrigerant management. So a number of the issues that were mentioned, the policies, the scale, the equipment, the capacity, the technology options, the financial mechanisms, are all working against LVCs in terms of us being able to seriously consider a lot of the issues and measures that have been put forward in the report. And finally, Mr. Co-Chair, I would just like to say that any recommendations that are put forward by the task force, I would like to respectfully suggest that the special circumstances and the needs of LVCs be taken into consideration in developing these recommendations. Thank you very much.
Good to hear, let's say, your thoughts, Grenada. And I now would like to go to the TEEP task force and to reply to some of the questions that were posed. So TEEP task force, yes. You need, does it mean 5 minutes? No, they cannot listen. Yes, Teep, you're ready, so...
They prefer to answer the questions from there.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, please, please that come back if there's so many, if that's easier for you, then come back. I just want to say I have South Africa, Kuwait, Micronesia, Canada, Nigeria, Chile, Kenya, Argentina, United States and EU on my list, and I would like to close it because it's getting, otherwise it takes a long time for, let's say, getting further on this. So be brief in your interventions and also be clear on some of the questions.
It's getting hot.
Please. Teep, you can give the answers. Are you ready? Okay, please. Can the microphone be put on for Teep here? Can somebody put the mic on for the Teep members, please? I'm not sure who I'm talking to, but there should be somebody working on the microphone now for Teep here. Microphones, please. Please.
Thank you. So I'm Ashley Woodcock, I'm a TEEP co-chair, I'm proud of this team. I wanted to put a few qualifiers in before we start, please. First of all, I think you'll agree LRM is very important. It's the first time we've really discussed it. It's the first time TEEP discussed it. We had a new team. We produced a report in 8 weeks. And so please accept that this is a first effort that we think we'll be able to refine with time. The second point I'd like to make is that we're going to try to respond to questions and not policy statements. And so we will try to be selective. If we miss your questions, it's by error. We're trying to stick to the response to questions right now. Thank you.
Can the microphone put on here? Neck?
Okay. Well, we have a couple of questions from Bahrain. I thank you, Bahrain distinguished delegate. And we are, as Ashley just mentioned, we are many of the task force members here that will be also participating in this discussion and answer some specific points. So the first one, the first point that Bahrain asked is about specific challenge regarding high ambient temperature countries, specific LRM challenge that are associated with high ambient temperature countries. And then I will ask Bassan, please. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for the distinguished delegate from Bahrain for the question. We actually, when we were looking at the challenges, we considered the commonalities, what commonalities we can base our analysis on. And we based it on consumption because we found this is where we could identify challenges according to the consumption of the country. So we based it according to the categories that were identified in the RTF report and that we used in the LRM report, brackets A, B, C, and D, and E being the LVC countries. We looked for other commonalities that we can, and we did not find anything specific that we could base it on, in particular to the high ambient temperature considerations as far as the challenges are concerned. Thank you.
The second question that Bahrain asked is about the challenge associated with the reclamation of blends. Then Helen will talk about.
I hope I've understood the question correctly, so please let me know if I have not. So from a recovery perspective, I think there was a question around a little bit around the recovery of refrigerants and different equipment. Certainly there are many different capabilities of recovery equipment that recovers them at different speeds and for different the different properties related to refrigerants. So certainly your point is well taken. From a reclamation perspective for blends versus a single component refrigerant, there are a couple of different techniques that we see around the world. One technique is that some companies blend additional refrigerant in to make sure that they maintain the composition of the blend. So if it's supposed to be a 50-50 blend and one component is a little low, they may add a little bit in after they clean up maybe the moisture and remove some of the oil. Another technique is to use distillation columns to separate components and then maybe reblend them together. So there's a couple of different techniques out there that are used. Was that the question? Okay.
Thanks, Helen. Okay.
This question was the specific technologies for use in hot countries.
Oh.
I think that's what he meant.
Bassan has already mentioned. Okay. Well, the other question that is important one is the costs. And we talked about the challenge, LRM challenges for parties in general, and the cost was a challenge for the task force. As usual, it's a complicated issue. The costs that are provided in Table 7.2, Chapter 7 of the report, are not from a survey, a market survey. We didn't make any market survey. The costs are estimated, provided by experts from the task force and also outside experts. And this is important. Somehow this challenge can be somehow surpassed or treated well with the proposal for a data system or information that parties can provide. Thank you.
Could there be another microphone on? Can you raise your hand where you would like to have the microphone on? That maybe helps. Yeah.
Okay, I'm here now. It's like the children's game. On the question of Benin, on how you determine if you can reuse refrigerant directly or you need to recycle or reclaim, we have a reference to the international standard ISO 5149 on page 70 of the report. So it clearly shows the steps. Basically, if you are suspecting that there is no contamination, no risk of moisture in the refrigerant circuit, then they can directly reuse it in the same system it came from. This can happen, for example, if you put the same equipment on another location and it always worked well, then the technician can judge that it's okay to reuse directly. But in other cases, recycling or reclamation may be needed. So that's on page 70 of the report.
I think there was a question around destruction. So destruction technologies that have been approved or recommended by TEEP break down refrigerants into basic building blocks. So salts and carbon dioxide, et cetera. Those would be the breakdown products that we would see in general. There are also certainly local and regional requirements in many countries around emissions, both from a water and air perspective.
On the question from India, on the mapping of the situation in countries on direct and indirect leak detection methodologies, the report did not provide a mapping on the situation in the countries, but we did mention that indirect methods are typically used in complex installations or where they are located outdoors, making it very difficult in that case to use a direct method. So that may be an indicator of your situation in your country.
Can there be a microphone on?
Hi.
Yes.
So there was a question from India on the GAINS model. So, I mean, the GAINS model, basically, it is a scientific tool to combat air pollution and climate change simultaneously. And the methodology for modeling global F-gas emissions, as well as estimating mitigation potential and cost, it is already published in an open access peer-reviewed article. And I will be happy to discuss further detail about the GAINS model, I mean, to the country representatives after this meeting. Thank you.
So there was one question from India about accessibility to analysis equipment.
Yes.
Thank you also for the... Sorry, man.
Yes, please.
Thank you also for the distinguished delegate from Grenada for the comments that he raised regarding the LVCs. The report actually did concentrate on some of these challenges, but I think the way that was put is exactly correct, that the scale is an important factor, especially regarding to reclamation and destruction. On the other hand, we did identify that there is a lack or inadequate, let's say, equipment and tools and infrastructure in those countries in order to carry on an effective LRM. This added to the need for continuous training, awareness campaigns, and also the projects that can go with it. So thank you for that.
Thank you for answering these questions, and please be seated because maybe it's easier for you then to already distribute the questions when they are posed by some delegations, so thank you already. I have on my list, and I closed it, it was South Africa, Kuwait, Micronesia, Canada, Nigeria, Chile, Kenya, Argentina, United States, and it was the EU at the last, so, and I closed the list already. So South Africa, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Co-Chair. Firstly, we would like to thank the Government of Canada for their hospitality in this beautiful and warm city of Montreal. We'd also like to congratulate the Secretariat for the great organization of this meeting. And we are happy for the both of you as co-chairs to give us guidance throughout this week as we discuss important matters. Co-chair, this delegation would also like to thank the TIP task force for the report and the presentation on the important LRM. If refrigerants are not recovered, reclaimed, or disposed of correctly, the great work that the Montreal Protocol to protect the ozone layer and reduce greenhouse emissions will be negatively impacted. South Africa is of the view that environmentally sound management throughout a refrigerant's life cycle could lead to reduced equipment leakage and refrigerant loss. Increased availability of recycled and reused refrigerants will also assist parties in meeting their obligations as indicated by the TIEP task force. Refrigerant recovery during servicing and at equipment end of life for either reuse or destruction continues to be a challenge in most A5 parties. South Africa has received 4 reclamation machines through the MLF funding, and these machines are hosted by private organizations identified and contracted by the government of South Africa. Some of the challenges that we have encountered so far, particularly on reclamation, firstly includes a legislative restrictions. When we imported the equipment, they came with cylinders, and South Africa had standards of how reclamation cylinders should be. And the imported cylinders did not comply with the standards by the ministry in South Africa. We had to obviously exempt those cylinders so that we can be able to start using them. The second one, the second challenge, as also indicated by the TIP, was the issue of the complex equipment that any of the aspects on LRM can be encountered. This we have just overcome by training our 4 companies that are hosting these machines through international experts assisted by UNIDO. We also, after this, the training, we have seen a little bit of improvement. I mean, the training happened recently, but we are looking forward to great improvements with regards to reclamation in South Africa. We also are looking into dealing with policy barriers and incentives to be able to assist reclamation. We will also be embarking on awareness raising activities to make sure that all stakeholders understand the benefits for reclamation of these gases. All this, Mr. Co-Chair, is our efforts in improving LRM task force. They looked into the 4 aspects, the aspect of leakage, recovery, reuse, and destruction. Just a question on, and I don't know, maybe based on different regions and different localities, which aspect, whether be it leakage prevention, recovery, reuse, or destruction, would work best at different regions? Also considering the costs. I mean, my colleague from Bahrain spoke about the issues of costs, particularly at high ambient temperature regions. And my colleague from Grenada spoke about challenges that the LVCs would face with this in this regard. So the question that I would like the task force to comment on is, of all the 4 aspects, in which regions have they been implemented best, or is there other places where it is generally, or where it might not generally be possible to be able to implement some aspects of LRM? And with that, Mr. Co-Chair would like to pause by saying that we, as this delegation, are looking forward to the workshop that will be held back-to-back with the COP MOP. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Then I have Kuwait on my list.
Thank you very much, Mr. Co-Chair, and I would like to thank the TIEB task force for that extensive hard work in a short time manner. And I have several questions, but I will limit the things because of the timing and a lot of questions. First of all, I just want to say as a comment from my point of view that you mentioned all the causes and how to deal with RLM, but you didn't mention that predictive maintenance is a key factor and issue, that you didn't target it, you keep it as an open area. That is the key element of, and it's the crucial element in the servicing sector to prevent going to all
This was your question, Kuwait? Microphone for Kuwait, please.
Thank you. So that one of the key aspects, you didn't go through that one. The second thing, that one of the statements says that LRM is a key factor for Kigali compliance. Did you not engage why that also was not the key element in HPMBs and in HCFCs era at that time? Why it's become priority now and how we look to it? Because this is not mentioned in the report, why we put it on a priority issue for TIEB. And the other thing, that the comment from the TIEB regarding the high ambient temperature, saying that there is no effect and no diversity, I will mention for you a technical aspect from the manufacturer, big servicing company in Kuwait, saying this ones, and please, I need a reply on this one. Hot ambient temperature, it's tackling refrigerant blend, because the critical temperature for 14A is 46. In Kuwait is 54 degrees 2 days ago. So that will dilute and increase the pressure. Then the leakage percentage will be highly, because the pressure will be high. So this is one of the effects. The second effect on the servicing sector, the maintenance guys cannot go to the roof because they have to work in a specific timing. So this is the second element effect that TIEB, they reply that there's no effect and change if it's hot ambient or not hot ambient. The third one is the temperature regulate. Again, when it's leakage, then you cannot add, because the composition was diluted, especially if it's 410A or 407. The third one, that the equipment temperature working is less than what it should be in the roof and like this. The other thing that you didn't tackle and talk about, that now the limitation of safety and refrigerant, flammable refrigerant, will be highly extensive, because the new standard increase the limitation of charge from 150 to 700, and for other refrigerant L2 it become from 700 to 1.2. So that the pressurized refrigerant, the leakage will be high, and this is one of the elements that we were not supporting, increasing the limitation of charge just to open the market for a refrigerant where the leakage of that refrigerant will be increased, and we have to deal with it. The third element, unwanted refrigerant in a destruction facility, you mentioned as every country can have that facility to do it, and you didn't approach the price of destructions and the limitation of transporting unwanted hazardous refrigerant between borders, because this is again, an issue that we have to discuss how to transfer these refrigerants. So in this way, I just want to understand how you can say that high ambient temperature countries cannot, that behavior cannot be. One of the issues that's mentioned, that refrigerant recovery behavior, how you want a technical guy to sit in the roof where the temperature in the roof between the air condition is 70 degrees, and you say in your presentation is timely. Do you think there is a human being can work and recover refrigerant for 45 minutes, and you say high ambient temperature cannot affect the servicing and our life cycle managed refrigerant? It was really, unfortunately, the statement was not incorrect, and we can have a big dialogue about this one. Thank you very much.
Next one on my list is Micronesia.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. We thank the team for preparing this report. We found it very informative and helpful, and we express our great appreciation to the task force for producing such a thorough report in a short time. We first have a few questions followed by our comments. Number one, we understand from the report that LRM is a holistic approach to the full life cycle of the refrigerant, from design to destruction. Are there certain LRM steps that produce greater atmospheric benefits than others, or that should be prioritized in terms of first steps? Number two, what kind of measures, policies, and infrastructures do countries need to have in place to enable optimal LRM practices? Do some require special or urgent attention? And number three, we also want to understand more about the particular challenges for low-volume consuming countries and how these can be addressed, as also as expressed by other countries. That concludes our questions. Now a few comments. As was so elegantly expressed by the Executive Secretary at the opening of this meeting, this report emphasizes that the benefits to the atmosphere from taking a life cycle approach to refrigerant management are both extensive and readily available. LRM is one of the most significant opportunities to reduce near-term warming and the impacts of climate change. Mr. Co-Chair, colleagues, while there are many efforts going on worldwide to address climate change, few if none offer the same results in the short order. The world is in dire need of these kinds of solutions. Mr. Co-Chair, we were deeply saddened to hear of the devastation from the recent hurricane in the Caribbean, one of the earliest and most unusual they have ever experienced. It is likely only the first of a series of increasingly powerful and unpredictable storms to come this season. In our region of the world, climate change is intensifying extreme weather and raising temperatures to levels that threatens our lives and livelihoods. We all know the impacts are even more widespread, and the world is at the brink of irreversible tipping points. As this delegation has said in the past meetings, the question is not whether we should fully support the incorporation of LRM, but how quickly and fully we can do so. Two foundational measures to optimize action on LRM are underway for A5 countries: the preparation of inventories and national plans. These are key to managing banks, but they do not guarantee parties' ability to formulate optimal plans or to deliver on the opportunities available throughout the life cycle. LRM is a matter of equity. Leaking cooling equipment is more expensive to operate, and inefficiency contributes to other negative impacts like food loss and waste and energy insecurity. These issues are pronounced in all countries, but most especially in high vulnerable countries. LRM is a complex and evolving issue. All countries can benefit from information and capacity building, but not all countries and regions do not have the same capacity to implement LRM. We fully support the comments of the distinguished delegate from Grenada regarding the special challenges and needs of LVCs, and to join our voice to theirs in requesting special consideration to our group in capacity, institutional strengthening, and other financing considerations. Our delegation is encouraged by the wide array of options for action highlighted in this report and by the creative, positive, and collaborative spirit around these discussions. There are important linkages with energy efficiency, dumping, and Kigali compliance that deserve further integrated attention. Now it is time to consider next steps to enable our institutions to take effective action. We hope to see the creation of a contact group that will allow for exchange of ideas on these next steps. We believe that we could all benefit from additional information from the TEEP, but equally important is the need to explore ways to strengthen the enabling environment to develop robust national plans and swiftly take them forward into action. There are also opportunities for increased cooperation among countries, either through regional or global approaches. Mr. Co-Chair, life frequently presents us with the choice to do nothing, to do the bare minimum, or to do our very best. These are not days to sit with our arms folded, but rather to celebrate the extraordinary capacity of this forum, to show the world yet again what successful cooperation looks like. We look forward to rising to this challenge. Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair.
Thank you. Good to hear you. And the next speakers on my list are Canada and Nigeria. And after that, I come back to the TEEP task force for answering some questions. And then I go to the last group of countries that indicated that they would like to speak. And I already closed the list. So first, Canada.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. First, we would like to thank the TEEP task force for the report resulting from decision 3511. Canada believes that it provides useful information on the important contribution that LRM can have on the recovery of the ozone layer and reducing climate impact of used refrigerants. And it highlights the potential scale of costs and challenges faced by many parties wanting to implement better LRM programs. We find that the report is logically structured by themes of the life cycle, refrigerant management, whether it's information on technologies for leak detection, reclaim or destruction, policies adopted by various parties, and estimates on cost. So overall, we find that the report provides a useful reference document providing an overview of LRM for all parties. We also find very useful the inclusion of policies implementing by parties on this issue. And in this regard, we know that one of the most important policy, impactful policy regarding LRM that Canada has implemented was not mentioned in the report. And it requires all importers and reclaimers of refrigerant to develop and implement a refrigerant stewardship program, where all the companies subject to the policy participate in a program that collects used halocarbon in the stationary refrigeration and air conditioning sector in order to reclaim or destroy the used refrigerant. We would be happy to share some of our lessons learned for this project, for this program. We have a couple of questions for the task force as well. If they could maybe explain a little bit more how the ozone and climate benefits in terms of metric tons ODP and CO2 equivalent were estimated in the report, and whether these account for the removal and disposal of HCFCs and HFCs contained in the foam that's in the equipment, and whether the task force can provide distinct estimates for the benefits associated with the refrigerant components and those associated with the foam components. And our other question is similar to the ones raised by other delegates, and if the task force would have some recommendations regarding the area of focus as a starting point for parties wanting to initiate LRM programs. And just to, in conclusion, so we note in the report that it states that in 2012, 60% of newly produced HFCs were used for the servicing of refrigeration and air conditioning equipment, while the remaining 40% was used for filling new equipment. So essentially, over the lifetime of equipment, more HFCs are used in the servicing aspect than filling up when new. So it's indicative of the importance of LRM. So at this time, Mr. Co-Chair, we're looking forward to the workshop that's planned ahead of the MOP later this year, and we're hopeful that it will help inform further discussions at the MOP. Thank you very much, Mr. Co-Chair.
Last, let's say, from this group is Nigeria, so please, Nigeria.
Thank you very much, Mr. Co-Chair. As this delegation is taking the floor for the first time, I would like to join other delegates in thanking the government of Canada for hosting us, and also the Ozone Secretariat for organizing this meeting. Having said this, I would like to draw the attention of the co-chair to this statement. Refrigerant that is not recovered during servicing, maintenance, or disposal of a refrigeration and air condition equipment is considered emitted, meaning it is released into the atmosphere. And you all know the implication of these statements. Mr. Co-Chair, my delegation wishes to commend the task force for their hard work in preparing this report, which contains a lot of useful information. We noted the key findings, highlighting the challenges and opportunities associated with LRM, as well as the efforts and policy frameworks that have been put in place to address life cycle refrigerant management. Effective management of a refrigerant life cycle will be very critical to the successful implementation of the HFC phase down and facilitation of compliance by Article 5 parties. The challenges of unavailability and lack of accessibility of the technologies for refrigerant recovery, reuse, and destruction requires that adequate and sustainable capacity for life recycled refrigerant management be developed in A5 parties. Furthermore, addressing the barriers to the sustainability LRM will be important in supporting preferential recycling and recovery and environmentally sound disposal and destruction of end-of-life ODS and HFC, thereby minimizing their emissions. Mr. Co-Chair, my delegation therefore look forward to a very robust discussion in the forthcoming workshop on life cycle refrigerant management that will assist in arriving at a very concrete and clear outcome on this critical subject. Thank you.
Good to have heard your thoughts as well, Nigeria. And then it's up now to the TEEP task force to reply to several of the questions. So, okay. Please, can there be a
Thank you.
microphone
Thank
for TEEP? Yeah.
Yep. On the question of South Africa, and there is a similar question from Micronesia on what works best in terms of LRM, the leak prevention, compared to RRRD, reuse, recycling, and so on. In the Chapter 8, based on theoretical modeling, we come to a balance of leak prevention about 40% of the contribution and RRRD about 60% of the contribution. But the actual situation may depend on the bank and the size and the type of refrigerants you have in your country. So the report did not provide an analysis on a parties basis, but it was a generic modeling.
We would like to thank the distinguished delegate from Kuwait for the intervention and the comments that were made. We have based our response on the fact that the technology is the same. However, we do admit that the implementation challenges are different. And by welcoming your comments, we would like to propose a bilateral discussion on this where we can have more of the information and the input into what we have determined so far.
And in addition to Kuwait's comment on predictive maintenance, which is also a key element for leak prevention, we fully agree with you. It was maybe not sufficiently mentioned in the report, so point taken. Thank you.
On the point from distinguished delegate from Micronesia on the most significant challenges for the LVCs, we believe the distinguished delegate from Grenada made the case very clearly regarding the lack of adequate funding, which translates into lack of equipment and lack of probably training opportunities. However, we do also realize that because of the economies of scale, the two biggest challenges are in reclamation and destruction. And we are cognizant that there are quantities of refrigerant that are being stored in some countries with no solution, especially unwanted refrigerant with no solution at present as to how to dispose of these refrigerants. So we probably have indicated that in the report, and we thank you for bringing it up.
It's not coming. Okay, okay. There was another question from Kuwait on the challenges of transborder shipment. We do mention in the report, and we mention the link with the Basel Convention. So that's part of that's part of our report. Thank you.
I think there was a question from Canada, thank you, around whether or not foam was included in the modeling. So in the decision, it was focused on refrigerants. So we tried very hard to stick to the decision, and we did not include foams in the report. And I think that, you know, Hildy, I think that you addressed the question around where to start. And then do you want to?
Yeah, just want to add on the question from Canada. So what we have considered in the modeling is refrigeration, air conditioning, and heat pump. But we have not considered foam sector and foam used in the refrigerators, for example. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you for providing these answers. Then I go to the last group of interventions, and the first one is Chile, please.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Mr. Co-Chair. Since it's the first time that Chile is taking the floor, I would like to express our deep gratitude to Canada for being such excellent hosts for the 46 Open-Ended Working Group meeting. We also extend our thanks to Secretariat for all their hard work, preparing the documents and the logistics to make this meeting a success. And we wish you, the co-chairs, every success in your work. First of all, we would like to recognize the valuable work of the Technical and Economic Assessment Group, the TEEP, and we welcome very much their thorough report on available technologies for leak prevention, obstacles and challenges, as well as the benefits of these technologies for the climate and ozone layer. The report also analyzes incentive schemes, producer responsibilities, good practices, and lessons learned for the effective prevention of leaks, recovery, recycling, reuse, reclamation of refrigerants, all of which are of great interest to our country. We believe that this is an absolutely crucial matter. Leak prevention, recovery, recycling of refrigerants, and the development of inventories and destruction techniques are all essential. And this is why we advocate a more in-depth analysis of funding options. It's essential to find solutions to manage existing refrigerants by creating more recovery and recycling centers and funding destruction. Finally, we are grateful for the back-to-back workshop with the MOP. This is intended to share experience, information, lessons learned, and to assess the challenges related to the strengthening of life cycle management of refrigerants, which we hope to contribute to with our experiences and with the task force and secretariat. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you. And the next one on my list is Kenya. Kenya, please.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. This delegation thanks the TIP task force for the detailed report on LRM. After carefully listening to the presentation, this delegation has a concern on the refrigerant identifiers that have been acquired and are now faulty. It has been difficult to repair them as they need to be taken back to the manufacturers, which is difficult because of the cost element. And this is posing a challenge to Article 5 countries. As a result, there are challenges in identifying the refrigerants and also identifying contaminated refrigerants. Further, we note that if they are not repaired, they also pose a challenge of becoming waste. We have noted this was not covered in the report. We therefore request the TIP task force to shed light on how to handle this challenge on the repair of refrigerant identifiers and the impact of the faulty or broken down identifying refrigerants and contaminated refrigerants. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Next one on the list is Argentina.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. Since this is the first time our country is taking the floor, we would like to thank the Government of Canada for hosting us once again in Montreal, a beautiful city, and certainly we are able to enjoy it this time of the year. We thank the Secretariat for the excellent organization of the meeting, as always, and we also thank the TEEP, because this is a very complex issue, and the Multilateral Fund has funded experiences, and but there are a lot of different cases and specific circumstances. In 2005, we started working on this, so it's a long-standing issue. And I'm not going to go into the background. I'm going to get to the point because we don't have much time. But we established 2 recycling centers, recovery centers, and 5 recycling centers. Argentina is a very big country with a low population, so we have a lot of challenges before us. I really asked for the floor because, having heard from the distinguished delegate of Bahrain about the cost of equipment, I'd just like to second what he says, because just a few months ago, we set up the latest generation equipment because in 2005 we got started, but the equipment was not very good, and now it's obsolete. But the latest equipment was up and running right away. It's very good. It's high tech, and it was $110,000 without a chromatography. But and we asked for spare parts for 2 years and additional equipment, including identifiers. And there was also training included for the recycling staff. The biggest challenges in our country, aside from the size, the country and the low population, I think are something that all big countries have, and it's the problem of transports to the distribution center, and the transport and recycling processes are very expensive. So what we did in the first stage, and we've been doing this over the years, is that the government offered an agreement to the centers, and the government provides cylinders and major equipment to the centers, and we offered bidding companies to sign an agreement with the companies and technicians doing the recycling, and they didn't have to pay for recovery or transport, and this was a good incentive. We have an agreement with one of the biggest importers of the country, and this is very useful for blends. And they have a network of transportation, which is virtually nationwide. And thanks to our agreement with them, that brought the cost down for transport considerably. And as I said earlier, that helps us to recycle blends. And the company gets a percentage based on this agreement. The government doesn't have to do anything. And the company gets a share of the product that is recycled. And that brought the cost down a lot. And it was a win-win situation. And that's why I think it's still working, and working very well. So that was a major breakthrough. And I think that's all for now. Perhaps the TEEP could assist countries that are exploring this kind of arrangement. Transport is a major challenge. The cost of transport is a challenge, and the cost of actual recycling and recovery. Thank you.
Then the 2 last speakers on my list, that is the United States and the EU. United States, please.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. We'd like to thank the TEEP Task Force for their comprehensive report on LRM. It was very clear and detailed and had a lot of useful examples on policies and programs, as well as detailed examples of challenges that are faced by both Article 5 and non-Article 5 countries that could impact robust investments into LRM. So we also note it's a very timely report, especially as the ODS phase-out is coming to its final stages and the HFC phase-down is beginning, with many Article 5 countries submitting their KIPs to the MLF. And we also are looking forward to the information and the plans that are going to be developed under the funding window open in the MLF for the preparation of national inventories of banks and plans for their disposition. So as others have noted, LRM is a very big topic and there are lots of aspects to discuss further, so we just wanted to make a few notes from the report that particularly resonated with us. So there was a lot of emphasis in the report on reclaim, recycling, and reuse, and challenges that were related to establishing reverse supply chains and end-of-life management of refrigerants. So we would note that it is important to ensure that used refrigerant can be reused either through reclamation or recycling before seeking its destruction. But we also want to note that it's very important, and we should not forget about continued training of technicians in best practices for servicing and maintenance to prevent leaks and ensure that equipment can be operated efficiently, as this is a key aspect of good refrigerant management. We also appreciated that the report noted significant benefits could be made from A5 parties potentially working together in regional groups to set up reclaim and destruction infrastructure to achieve economies of scale. So we think this is a useful suggestion that would benefit from further discussion and investigation. So we are looking forward to the workshop that will be held on the margins of MOP later this year, and engaging with the Ozone Secretariat on the planning and development for the workshop. Thank you.
Thank you. And then the last speaker on my list is the EU.
Mr. Co-Chair, we would also like to join previous speakers and really thank the members of the task force for their very detailed and well-structured analysis on this indeed timely topic. Evidently, responsible life cycle refrigerant management is crucial for minimizing emissions. For almost 2 decades, the EU has put in place binding legislation on refrigerant management on HFCs, while mirroring rules in EU legislation for ozone-depleting substances date since 2000. EU rules include emission prevention, regular leak checks on refrigeration, air conditioning, and heat pump equipment containing controlled substances, recovery obligations, rules on destruction, as well as detailed certification requirements for technicians covering all key activities such as maintenance, servicing, repair, recovery, and leak checks. Since 2024, new EU rules have extended obligations to also cover HFOs, while certification obligations for technicians also now cover main alternatives, including naturals. To also note that unlawful release of controlled substance into the atmosphere is not only an infringement of our regulation at climate level, but it is also considered a crime under EU environmental legislation, punishable also by imprisonment. Complementary to this legislative framework, we also have EU environmental waste legislation that provides very important complementary measures for reducing emissions, most of which were mentioned in your report, so thank you for that. At EU level, we also have some good practices implemented by our member states. We have central registration databases, including apps that enable the electronic recording of leak checks and other activities of equipment containing controlled substances, as well as central reporting databases that allow a clear monitoring on the movement of refrigerants, also deterring illegal trade. In EU legislation, a key driver for a careful management of available refrigerants is the establishment of use bans for existing equipment, which this goes beyond the requirements of the Montreal Protocol. Such rules incentivize the recovery and the reuse of controlled substances, while they allow the operation of existing equipment with reclaimed or recycled substances. And of course, the EU phase-out of HFCs is on its own a driver for reclamation, since gases reclaimed within the EU are not subject to quota requirements. And we would also like to highlight that a smart option to avoid a buildup of future HFC, HFO banks is the use of environmentally friendly low GWP replacements, including natural refrigerants, from the start of the refrigeration life cycle where possible. And finally, a question to the members of the task force. We were wondering whether, and if so, to which extent, a refrigerant deposit system has been considered in your work. Just to explain that in some parties there is such a system established which allows equipment users to receive refund if used refrigerants are returned for destruction or reclamation recycling. It would just be interesting to see maybe the pros and cons of such an approach. Again, thank you very much for your important work, and we're also looking forward for the workshop so that we can continue our work on this important topic. Thank you.
Please, Teep, could you provide, let's say, the answer? And
I'm just thanking all the comments. We'd like to thank all the comments and many experience and programs and information that we didn't have enough time to assess, like mechanisms for supporting incentives and financial that were mentioned by Canada, by Argentina, very interesting models for supporting LRM. So I think we just have one question that will be answered by Bassan, please.
Yeah, thank you for the distinguished delegate from Kenya regarding the question about identifiers. We realize that there is a global shortage now of identifiers, and I believe also that the identifiers have been changing. There have been several families of identifiers, but it's just we acknowledge and thank you for the remark.
Thank you. On the question of the EU regarding refrigerant deposit systems, which is actually a kind of EPR scheme, if I understood well, I need to double check, but I think we have the example of France in there. So that's one of the initiatives in the member state taken, which seem to have delivered quite well so far.
thank you, Teep, for all your good work and by providing all the answers. And sometimes the technology was a little bit more difficult than normally, but it worked finally. I have to consult for one moment and come back. I think we had a very good discussion here, and there were a lot of questions, and also a lot of good examples were already provided by what happens in the countries and also what are the challenges in the country. And I thought we already had a little mini workshop already, so that's good. Looking forward, we also have a workshop before the MOP, and I think it is also good if in the corridors different delegations who are interested in this issue can consult each other, talk to each other, look for ways forward. And because we have this workshop, and because it also will come back to the MOP, to close this agenda item. So if that's a way forward, that's our proposal here from the co-chairs. So it will come back at the MOP, and there are a lot of ideas provided already here, and we have a workshop, and please consult upon each other how the way forward can look like. But we would like to close the agenda item as it is now. I see there is, okay, then I don't see any reactions on that, so then we close it for now and come back to it at the workshop and at the MOP in the end of this year. Now I will hand over to my co-chair, please.
Thank you, Ralph. And now I invite parties to turn to agenda item 5 on enhancing the global and regional atmospheric monitoring of substances controlled by the Montreal Protocol. The 35th MOP adopted Decision 3514, by which the Ozone Secretariat was requested to provide at this OEWG meeting information on cost estimates associated with enhancing atmospheric monitoring and options for sustainable funding to establish new monitoring capacities. On A, cost estimates, the Ozone Secretariat and the Steering Committee of the European Union-funded pilot project on atmospheric monitoring of controlled substances organized an online workshop to bring experts together to refine the cost estimates for establishing and operating monitoring stations. The outcomes of the workshop can be found under the background documents in the meeting portal for this OEWG. On B, the Ozone Secretariat's report can be found in addendum to the note 46/2 Ed 1, supplemented by document 46/INF4, prepared with the assistance of a financial expert. We have with us today some representatives of the Steering Committee and the Secretariat who will present the outcomes of the workshop and the key points on the options for sustainable funding, respectively. And on behalf of all the parties, I would like to thank the Secretariat and the Steering Committee for their hard work. And now I would like to invite the scientists of the Steering Committee to present the outcomes of the workshop. Please keep your presentation within the allocated time of 15 minutes. You have the floor.
Thank you, and good afternoon. Like a bad penny, I keep turning up. My name is Paul Newman. I'm on the steering committee, and with me is Sophia Mailona on my right. Dr. A.R. Ravi Shankara, or Ravi, is also on the committee. Cornelius Rhine, sitting over here somewhere, I think, is also on the committee, and Ray Weiss is on the committee. I want to start off by showing you 3 stations that are used to make the observations that we derive the top-down emissions from. And you can see these are in fairly remote locations, Macehead, Cape Metatula, and Cape Grim, Tasmania, Australia. You can see there they have these nice towers, they have buildings there. These are the stations that we're talking about that would fill the gaps in doing emissions. So there's some of the key things here that you see with these stations after you built them. There are conditioned labs there. They have a nice sampling tower. We like a tower that's about 30 meters tall. You got to get away from the surface because you get emissions from the surface. You also want higher up where the wind, if you've ever been standing next to a building, you know how buildings affect the transport at the surface. Also, there's friction at the surface. So you want to get up a little ways in altitude to get a free measurement of the local atmosphere. That's why you have a tower there. You need reliable power. You need reliable internet and road access for these particular stations. And the bottom line is that making the necessary observations at the parts per trillion level is very, very hard. When we talk about ozone and air quality at the surface, we're talking about tens of parts per billion. So we're talking about something that is 10,000 times more sensitive to actually measure. So it's tough to make these measurements. So we keep that in mind as we proceed. Oops, I went too fast. Now, there's two ways of doing atmospheric monitoring. We do bottom-up emissions, which the TEEP has talked about pretty extensively. I think you mainly are all aware of this. I'm going to focus on the top-down approach, which is what the Scientific Assessment Panel does. Steve Monska this morning showed you some emission patterns for dichloromethane and carbon tetrachloride, and this is just kind of a listing of how we do that. Now, I'm going to jump to the disadvantages. So for bottom-up, you might have missing sources, you might have modeling emissions of past consumption, intentional violations not reported, and irregular reporting can be disadvantaged. The disadvantage of the top-down measurements is that you really can't tell. You make a measurement, you get an emissions measurement, but you might not know precisely where that's coming from. So you can't narrow it down to a neighborhood or a particular block or a particular plant. So you have to kind of rely on getting a broad regional look. So I think you've all seen this map before. This shows both the NOAA and the A-gauge stations around the world. Then the red and magenta are the NOAA stations, and the blue and the purple are the A-gauge stations. So you can see, and the shading shows where we can actually kind of monitor emissions with these stations. So you see there's a lot of gaps, and I've put little circles around these gap areas, and so you can pick out the particular area that we don't measure particularly well. These stations are great for global monitoring, but for regional monitoring, we have very large gaps. So now I want to talk about how we actually do these top-down measurements and the sampling necessary. There's really two major approaches. You can do flask sampling at a station. Then you send those flasks off to be analyzed in a laboratory at a central facility. There's a few of these around the world. They're not all over the world. There's only a few. High-frequency measurements can be made by analytical instrumentation at the sampling location. That's what we call high-frequency measurements. So these two things are really not, exclusive, mutually exclusive. The initial flask sampling, which we would do if we choose a place we'd like to make measurements, we'd go there and make a survey with flasks to test actually what do we see at a particular location, how unique is it. The measurement expertise is similar, but distributed differently. You have to have a measurement expert located with or nearby a particular station if you've got a high-frequency measurement there. When you come to flasks, you still have to have that expertise, but now you have it in an analytic facility somewhere in the world. For example, Boulder in the NOAA lab, or the University of Bristol, Ray Weiss's lab in California. Okay. There are many commonalities and needs, and some of the costs are similar or virtually the same. So a real holistic approach is needed to take advantage of these synergies with other scientific and non-scientific infrastructures. And there's commonalities and differences between monitoring Montreal Protocol gases and greenhouse gases. Major differences in concentrations. For example, we measure CO2 in parts per million range, and we talk about CFCs in the parts per trillion range, and backgrounds and sources and sinks are always different. Okay, so what does it take to quantify emissions? And I highlighted in blue calibration. If you make a measurement, say in North America, and you're going to compare that measurement to something made in Australia, you need a calibration standard that can be applied in both locations. Or you make measurements at both, take a flask at both. You need to commonly analyze that and use a calibration standard to get high quality measurements. And I can't really emphasize this enough. Calibration is crucial. It's what turns an observation into a piece of gold. And so we also need these observation system simulation experiments, OSSIs. Okay, this tests with meteorological data what a station, a particular point on the Earth can do as a monitoring site. There are various current monitoring stations and networks around the world. Some would be useful for us. Many aren't that useful. Putting a station in the middle of a city probably isn't very useful. You measure a lot of pollutants in cities, probably measure a lot of outgassing of CFCs and HFCs. So in urban centers is not adequate, and there's a lot of other examples of that. Example of flask sampling is what we've been doing with the pilot project, looking at flask sampling from Bola Island. Okay, now we did do a workshop for estimating costs, and we'll talk a little bit about the components of the measurement system and the description of the workshop, and then I'll show you a table of the cost estimates. Okay, so here's the description of the workshop. It really was we decided to do this workshop in response to decision 35/14. It was held, the workshop was held on the 23rd of February. You can see we had about 35 attendees. These are all experts in costs and measurements who were at this workshop. Discussions followed the presentations from the steering committee on the needs. The attendees provided a lot of cost information. These are experts who have built towers around the world, who make flask measurements around the world. So we had the real pros at this particular workshop. Okay, so steps for setting up monitoring. First of all, you have to identify a particular location where you want to station. Okay, and this is not easy. Like I pointed out, for those 3 stations I showed in the pictures, those were very carefully chosen, and we have to do the same thing here to pick a station that will fill gaps. Okay, you need to carry out an OSSI, so it's got to be suitable for sampling. One of the things that we can do, any one of these steps is down in this left corner box, is carry out a survey flask measurement. So we could do this at any stage to see if we're actually seeing interesting things at a particular station. Okay, we get to the infrastructure. Is there infrastructure that supports making the observations, and does the host country agree? Can the host country provide support? And then we have to, when you make flask measurements, you have to have an analytic facility that's willing to handle those flasks. You just can't go out and start filling flasks and hope somebody's going to analyze those to the proper scientific quality. So then you make a decision at the end, are we going to put a high frequency sampling there, or just continue daily or monthly or weekly sampling? So the goal is to actually set up new stations. Now, to give you an idea of what we're talking about, here's some flask systems. On the top right, you see a set of flasks. They come in a case, and you fill them up one by one. And then, so you bring them to a site, fill them up one by one, and then you mail them back to the analytic facility. And then there's 2 pictures of these analytic facilities down. The one on the bottom left is from Steve Monska's lab. This is both the GCMS instrument, that's the M4 in the lower left, and the Perseus GCMS is in the bottom right there. Here's some of the commercially available high-frequency instruments. The commercial Medusa type instrumentation, which is used in the A-gauge network. On the left is the one from the Marcus Bristol UK Medusa, and on the right is the excuse me for mispronouncing this, the Wanaoko Fudan ODS Medusa system. Now, there's the high cost path and there's the low cost path. Here's the flask cost flow chart. And you can see that if you go down the left side, the green arrow, you skip a lot of the steps like building towers and so forth. And so you can get a lower cost if there's infrastructure available. Same thing is true of the high frequency cost flow chart. You can skip a couple of steps. You don't have to build, cost out the location, do the OSSI with it, do sampling of flask. If you already got something available, the building's there, you can actually save quite a bit of money. So here's the table, okay? And the left row shows you what, excuse me, there are 5 rows there. The first row is collection facility building it. And that can range from anything from $0 to $370,000 for the high frequency, and about the same thing for flask sampling, depending on how complex you want your flask sampling to be there. Land acquisition, if the governments give it to you for free, it can be 0. knock on wood. And also the chemical analytic facility, where you want to actually, analyze flasks if you get them. Also, you need calibration facilities here. That's actually in the fourth row. And then finally, the materials and supplies for analysis. The bottom line is that an on-site, high-frequency measurement station infrastructure is going to cost you about $500,000 US dollars to about $1.3 million. The flask sampling can be considerably cheaper, and you can get that from about $50,000 into the really nice flask sampling site up to $1.3 million. Okay, there's a few important points to note here that I've kind of covered already. These are highly variable facility costs. We haven't really included the personnel costs, so who's there actually doing the work. Shipping costs can be variable. Remember, if you're moving flasks between countries, there can be taxes and so forth that go in there. So it's very location dependent, these costs. And these are startup costs. This is not, we haven't got anything off the ground yet, so startup costs. Again, the existing infrastructure is a big player. Co-operating facilities, if there's a previous station there, a meteorological station, and it's suitable, you can really reduce costs. US dollars, and the costs not included, the annual recurring personnel costs. Personnel costs you a lot of money. And so that, particularly when you need personnel that has expertise, some scientific expertise and analytic expertise. The Aussie studies cost money. Fortunately, all the Aussies that we've done as part of the project have been done at MIT, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, for free. They did it as an in-kind support, and we thank Ken Jux and NASA for supplying that support also. The data analyses are not free. So to make a measurement, you have to convert that into an emission. That analysis requires money. And also information dissemination. Publishing the data costs money, and actually storing data costs money. So the strategy, I've kind of covered the first 4 bullets in gray. We really have to start the project development. We have to begin to identify specific points that we think are adequate for us and start costing out specific locations that have been confirmed by countries and so forth. And we need to ensure proper cooperation with other international programs. And Sophia will cover a few of those particular items. We need to do it as a step-by-step approach here. We need to identify the sites, as I already mentioned, and do the Aussies. Monitoring sites are developed from available funding. We have to have the money in hand before we can get things going. If a few sites are developed at any particular given time, demand for funds is manageable, and funds could be sourced through existing trust funds. And we must consider the long-term operating costs. So we build these things, they're going to cost you every single year. The operational costs can be significant, particularly, as I've mentioned, because of personnel. So key points and challenges: cost sharing in kind, reduced costs, working with other observation programs. Again, Sophia will comment on this. Staff training and capacity building. Once you build the station, you still need to train up all of the people working there. Calibration. I marked this out in blue because I think calibration is really key. It's very important to have international calibration standards. Data sharing is essential. You can make a measurement. It's like, if a tree falls in the forest and nobody's there, does it actually make a sound? If you make an observation and you don't publish it, did you actually make the observation? And peer review of data and analyses is crucial to science credibility. These data have to go into the literature. They have to be looked at by other scientists and carefully analyzed. So thank you for your attention, and I will turn the mic to Sophia.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much, Paul. So my presentation is going to focus on paragraph B of decision 35 2014, which basically requested the Ozone Secretariat in consultation with the Multilateral Fund Secretariat and experts from the Ozone Research Managers, SAP and TEEP, to provide to this meeting options for sustainable funding to establish new regional monitoring capacities, including an assessment of advantages, disadvantages, potential implementation options, and also administrative processes to operationalize these options. Just to recap some relevant information provided by Paul, the online workshop, which was organized in February this year, basically brought together many experts in atmospheric monitoring who actually helped us very much refining the cost estimates associated with the establishment and operation of a new station for monitoring controlled substances. These workshop outcomes were actually considered and endorsed by the Ozone Research Managers at their 12th meeting, which took place in April this year. So based on the experts' input, the ranges of estimated annual costs for one station are presented in this table. You can see here that for a high-frequency station, costs were estimated to be, as Paul mentioned earlier, between $450,000 to $1.3 million US, and for a flask sampling station between $50 and $1.3 million. So with the low cost estimates basically assuming that infrastructure exists and gets adapted at zero or modest costs, while the higher cost estimates include costs for new infrastructure. So based on these annual cost estimates, the Secretariat, with the assistance of a financial expert, estimated approximate costs for a step-by-step approach and a programmatic approach. In a step-by-step approach, in which a single site is developed at any given time, we looked at capital and operating costs of one station for 5 years to ensure sustainability of the project. And in a programmatic approach, we looked at 4 scenarios, which had a mix of high-frequency and flask sampling stations operating again for 5 years. So then we considered 2 scenarios were for modest expansion involving 5 stations altogether, 2 high-frequency and 3 flask-based sampling sites, and 2 scenarios for aggressive expansion involving 10 stations altogether, like 4 high-frequency and 6 flask-based sampling sites. So now, having estimated the capital and operating costs of these 2 approaches, then we added some rough estimates about costs related to project preparation and capacity building, contingency, program management, and program support. So the resulting total cost estimates are presented in this table. And then you can see for a 5-year period running a station in a step-by-step approach or several stations in a programmatic approach, the grand totals were calculated to be as follows. You can see here in the step-by-step approach for one high-frequency station, the costs were between 1.5 to 2.5 $1 million, for one daily flask sampling station between $2 and $4 million, and then for weekly sampling about half of this. In the programmatic approach, if you were to go for a modest expansion, then the costs would range between 9 and 17 million, and for an aggressive expansion between 16 and 32 million. Now, obviously, these are very rough estimates based on very rough assumptions, And in the case of programmatic approach, a different mix of stations, if any, may be considered than that we have looked at. So having then an idea about how much money are we talking about in these two approaches, we explored different funding sources, and then we looked first at the existing funds under the Vienna Convention and the Montreal Protocol. That means the Trust Fund for the Vienna Convention, the Trust Fund for the Montreal Protocol, the Vienna Convention Trust Fund on Research and Systematic Observations, and the Multilateral Fund. And then we looked at some external funds from organizations which are active in emissions monitoring, like the GEF, WMO, the Green Climate Fund, and the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Organization. And we looked also at a few philanthropic institutions, particularly Bezos, the Bezos Earth Fund and the Gates Foundation. So, based on information obtained from the funding sources we have explored, in the rather limited time we had actually at our disposal to respond to this decision, here are some key points we arrived at related to potential implementation options. A simple and quick option could be to use the General Trust Fund for disbursement to projects for the establishment and operation of monitoring stations for controlled substances by allocating some specific amounts of funds so from the cash balances of the Vienna Convention Trust Fund and the Montreal Protocol Trust Fund, or from the MLF, or even from other sources. Another funding option could be to use the MLF by allocating a part of it for monitoring of controlled substances, or transferring a part of it to the General Trust Fund, subject, of course, to a policy decision by the parties and disbursement, authorization of such a disbursement by the Executive Committee. Options involving these trust funds are outlined in Addendum 1 to the note by the Secretariat and are further described in Annexes 5 and 6 to the addendum, as indicated on this slide. Now, we have also identified possibilities for cooperation with the GEF, for example, under the UNEP GEF program on global chemicals monitoring that supports the implementation of Stockholm and Minamata conventions on POPs and mercury, respectively, and through possible inclusion of controlled substance monitoring in the 9th replenishment cycle of the GEF, which is going to cover the period 2026 to 2030. In all of the above options, WMO, we didn't find that it could actually be serving as a funding institution, but as an implementing institution, rather. So again, we found out that it would be a key partner in implementing projects in monitoring of controlled substances, as it has done so regarding projects on ozone and UV under the Vienna Convention Trust Fund on systematic observations, on research and systematic observations for several years now. Oh, sorry, I hadn't. Yeah. So this is what I was saying. And then the last slide is in order to reduce costs and exploit synergies actually with other relevant networks and programs, it would be important to explore further and map out the existing infrastructure that exists under these programs. For example, stations, laboratories, etc. And we could use them. Many of these programs are under the WMO or CTBTO and the UNEP GEF program I was talking about earlier. We didn't have time to explore possibilities under the ambient air quality monitoring programs, which are which are existing now under UNEP and also in the UNEC region, but we would like to do that to see if there are any possibilities for piggybacking in a way. Finally, it would be worth exploring further the Global Climate Funds program on climate information and early warning systems, as well as the Bezos Fund, as our investigation of this funding option so far has been based basically on desk studies. So with that, I would like to thank you for your attention, and I will be happy to respond to any questions if you have any. Thank you.
Thank you, Steering Committee, for the presentation. And I would like to request the members to go back to their seats. Thank you. And since it's very close to 6 p.m., we would like to suspend this agenda item 5, and come back to this tomorrow morning. And since we have about 10 minutes, we will now go back to agenda item 3A, because we have received the CRP from Canada on VSLS. So now I would like to give the floor to Canada to introduce the CRP. This is an unedited advanced version.
Okay, thank you, Madam Co-Chair. Okay, so I just received notice from the Secretary that it's been posted. So just maybe to give a minute for parties to look for it. Maybe I'll just go quickly over some of the key operational paragraphs. And then that would allow us then to have maybe a meeting among interested parties or a contact group to discuss those in more detail. Essentially, the first paragraph would be a request by the TAP in cooperation with the Scientific Assessment Panel, as it was in the last decision, to include in its 2025 progress report a number of issues. So one would be to identify very short-lived substances that are not mentioned in the 2024 progress report of the TEEP. VSLS in particular that have emissions that could reach the lower stratosphere. The second would be to ask them to provide additional information on alternatives to emissive uses of very short-lived substances in the main applications for which they are currently used, and focusing on those VSLS with estimated emissive uses of at least 100,000 tons. So that's just a threshold that we're suggesting. But there could be others that parties could wish to discuss. And the third thing that they would present is a table providing, to the extent possible, for each very short-lived substances that was identified in the 2020, should read 2024 progress report, not 2025. In the 2024 progress report and pursuant to paragraph A of this decision, provide a table with the estimated annual production and consumption and estimated annual emissions of these substances. We retain also in brackets range of ozone depleting potentials and contribution to effective equivalent stratospheric chlorine, because that requires further discussions with the Scientific Assessment Panel. We did have a discussion with them, but while they were helpful in trying to see what could be provided there, there was not a definite decision on what would be the best metric to reflect the impact of the ozone layer that they could actually use at this stage without perhaps creating quite a significant amount of additional work. So that is something that would still need to be discussed by the group, so we retain it in square brackets. The second paragraph would be inviting parties that have either production data on VSLS or information on alternatives to emissive uses to provide such information to the OZOL Secretariat. We put a date there suggesting February 1st, 2025. That would be with a view that this would be at least early enough to facilitate the preparation of the TEEP report mentioned in the first paragraph. And then finally, the paragraph 3 and 4 were based on a suggestion made by the distinguished delegate from the United States during the discussion. It would be basically inviting parties that have national measures such as regulations or other measures related to VSLS to provide those to the Ozone Secretariat by February 1st, 2025. And the fourth paragraph would request the Ozone Secretariat to include those into a compendium, so in order to make them available to parties. Just to say, I forgot to mention at the beginning that this was just posted, but the delegations of Australia, the European Union, and Switzerland indicated that they're also co-sponsoring this draft decision. Thank you, Madam Co-Chair.
Thank you, Canada. Earlier today in the morning, we also agreed to establish a group on this issue. And now that we also have a CRP, the proposal from co-chairs is that we establish a contact group on this issue tonight. And now that it's almost 6, we would now like to close today's plenary. And if Secretariat could also indicate the time and room for the contact group on the screen. Okay. 1815 CR3, and the co-chairs for this contact group will be Bruna from Brazil and Heidi from Germany. And with that, we would like to close today's plenary and see you tomorrow morning, sharp 10 a.m. Thank you, everyone.